how did you first get involved with ethnic studies? What is your entry point into ethnic studies? And so any of you can start.
Okay, so I'll start us off, I guess.
Start us
Can
off.
everybody hear me? Everyone can hear me?
You gotta go closer.
Closer. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay, perfect. All right, so how did I get involved in ethnic studies? So I was thinking about how to answer this question, and I was thinking about a number of different things to say. I think one of the things for me as an undergraduate student at the University of Hawaii, one of the reasons why I majored in ethnic studies was just how politicized University of Hawaii is. So I'm from the island of Maui. I graduated Maui High School in '97. And I remember my first day of school as a college student, catching the shuttle and getting off at what was then Student Services, what is currently Queen Liliuokalani Center for Student Services. And I walked to my class, my first class, which by the way was an Ethnic Studies 101 class. I'll mention that in a little while. And I remember passing what is currently Saunders Hall, but what was then Porteous Hall. And I remember seeing effigies of Japanese, Kanaka Maoli, Filipino, etc., lynched and thrown over the side of the building with a giant banner that read, what was it, Stop Racism at UH, or End Racism at UH. And I remember not really understanding what all of that was about, but I also remember looking at that and smiling to myself, thinking, I'm gonna love college. And so, for those of you who don't know, right, that building was itself named after Stanley Porteous. Stanley Porteous was stupidly racist. Like, I don't know what other kind of word to use to describe pseudoscience except that it's stupidly racist. And he was a eugenicist who was hired by plantation owners to start to do different kinds of interviews. His entire first book was actually, in that book, specific book, was actually based off of just plantation rumors, off of just conversations he had with plantation owners. I remember eventually learning at one point that one of his arguments was that government spending on the education for Filipinos was itself a waste of government spending. And his argument was that Filipinos, like other groups who have lived closer to the equator, their heads, because of the Earth's gravitational pull, is oblong-shaped. Yeah, that was his actual argument, and that it apparently flew in academia. And so I learned about these things, and so I passed what was then Porteous Hall, and my first class was Ethnic Studies 101. It was taught by Daviana McGregor. She asked 3 questions. I'm not going to tell you what questions she asked, but I got all 3 questions wrong. And then at the latter part of her lecture, on the first day of class, she talked about the history of ethnic studies, how ethnic studies was formed, how it was formed by student and community-led movements. And I guess it started putting me on a track where I started to ask these kinds of questions. It started to help me to understand how racism informs a kind of politics of knowledge, right? Especially even at the university. So, for instance, why was it that Stanley Porteous himself got an entire building named after him? But at the same time, the Ethnic Studies Department, who was teaching under the banner of Our History, Our Way, had to struggle in movement in order to have the very class that I was taking, right? So I guess those kinds of questions, and that was just the first day of school. So it was really, I think for me, and I can mention a number of different things, a number of different faculty who really inspired me. But I guess that sort of set me on the track to get interested in ethnic studies.
Hello. Aloha. So I was quite literally born out of ethnic studies. I was the product of a lack of family planning on the part of a 20-year-old ethnic studies TA, undergraduate student at the time, and an international student who fell in love and ended up having me. So I grew up around student activism and the kind of energy that came out of young people, like Dean talked about, who were not only excited about what they were studying, but also how what they were studying was directly connected to struggles of people on the land and in communities. So my mom was born and raised in Kalihi, and she was raised by a family that had 10 siblings. Her mom was a single mom because my grandfather died young. He had been in the U.S. military and died at age 31, 32. And was raised in a small 2-bedroom plantation home in Kalihi, but ended up being able to go to Punahou because of various other circumstances related to the getting scholarship. And so anyway, she saw class difference from a very young age, and ethnic studies really appealed to her as a way to fight back against that whole slogan of our history, our way, of having an educational experience where nothing of her experience growing up in Kalihi as a Chinese or Hawaiian young woman, as a product of sort of the plantation and working class Hawaii, was in any way reflected in what she was learning at her school, and so she found ethnic studies. So that genealogy has always been really important to me because I learned about those struggles, fortunately, through their stories as well as through photographs, like the photographs of Ed Greevy. So I've been privileged to be able to work with him since then. And those stories were always really important to me because I got to hear how young people, how people who didn't have money, who didn't have land, could make a difference when they organized and came together, when they listened to each other's stories, when they had each other's back, when they cared for each other's families during rough times, during strikes, during possible evictions. And so that genealogy has been really important to me. And I want to play a short video clip of Pete Thompson. Many people have recognized him, and him having just recently passed this week. And before I do, I just want to give a little context to it. So in this clip, he's talking about the struggles of the Waiahole Waikane Community Association and their struggle against eviction right around that time when I was a toddler following my parents around. This clip comes though from a project that I got involved with, trying to get started, because in my own experience of schooling, the stories that I heard at home were not stories that I heard in school. So we didn't learn anything about Waiahole Waikane or Kalama Valley or anything like that throughout my time at Kamehameha. And then when I was working at Halau Kumana Public Charter School, kind of one of the moments that was sort of an impetus toward getting this project, the Mo'olelo Aloha Aina project, started was I started to discover that kids were really into this thing called YouTube, which I was like, what is that? And just to give you a kind of a sense of the time, it was, how many of you remember that OK Go video where they have all these treadmills that are facing in different directions and they've choreographed. So there were 2 videos on YouTube that everybody was watching. One of them was that OK Go video of these silly guys on treadmills. And the other was of one of our 9th grade students at Halau Kumana getting into a fight with another student or another young person from Papakolea, where she was from. And she had gotten the other girl down onto the floor, and she was kneeled over her, sort of on her knees, and she was just kind of like pounding her like that. And so these 2 videos were circulating, and it made me realize the power of that short video kind of genre for them, that it was something that they weren't necessarily sitting and watching long documentaries on their time, but it was a way of telling and sharing stories. And so what we wanted to do with this Mo'olelo Aloha Aina project was talk about and document different stories of different kinds of fights. Yeah, fights that were for land, for Aina. So this project was really all about getting to interview people who have been involved in direct action land struggle, and specifically to ask them sort of questions about what politicized them, what were strategies they used, how did they, sort of to demystify for the people, the participants who were interviewing, what it meant to be an activist and to become an activist for in direct action land struggle. So if we can just play this short clip of our interview with Pete Thompson.
When you really look at it, what do you have to do? What's all the steps that have to happen to successfully occupy the valley? You know what I mean? And you also have to look at what's the rationale that the decision makers have to go through. And one of the things that we put them on notice is, because you can see the logic of the law is on the side of the landowners and the developers, right? So the logic of the law is like, no, you can't stay, you gotta go. That's the logic. Okay, so when we saw that happening, we actually did like about 2 or 3 mock evictions. We called the press down. We outfitted the wahinis with these helmets and stuff like that. We outfitted a bunch of valley people to look like cops. We had the wahinis come and hold hands and with all the people behind them. And we had other guys trying to break through the line physically. So like, the media, they really like stuff like that. So they think, yeah, keep going, yeah, we like that, yeah, And so then after the media showed, then we're like, we're telling the authorities, well, Governor, we hope it doesn't come to this. You know what I mean? Because we really wouldn't like to see anybody get hurt, especially us. You know what I mean? And so you had to do stuff like that, and you had to do stuff to show your resolve, because we protested up in Mrs. Mark's house up in Nuuanu at least a dozen times probably. Okay, and we always did it legally and lawfully by staying outside, on the sidewalk. Well, there's really no sidewalk there, but kind of like on the side of the road outside of her place. But on the day that the actual eviction notice came down and now it's time to go, no more out in the road, right on in her lawn. And people marched around. She got a really big yard too, really big. And so they marched around. So when we left, actually have a big muddy circle. So like, even though like, okay, they all went home, when she looked out her yard, it's like, oh shit, like, she could see the big circle in her yard, you know what I mean, that was left, you know what I mean. So like, that kind of like stuck with her. And then I know she had a meeting with, I think, all of the developers and people like that up at her house. And one of our friends had a house next door, so we got binoculars and we looked at all the license plates and stuff like that, and we started calling up all the people. We got the list of all the Joe Powell's investors, for the business registration. And we look up all the addresses and we call them up at night, and we tell them, hey, you know what, we're just telling you, you shouldn't invest any money with him, you're going to lose money because we're not moving, So they were all like, oh, thanks for calling, And then he called us up, and then he would call us up, hey, you guys calling my investors, and don't be calling them. Well, I'm going to tell them hang up the phone then. You guys talking to us, tell them hang up the phone. I said, everyone will talk to us. They want to find out what the hell going on. You're not telling them nothing, huh? Yeah, then we used to go down to his office. We used to spy on him, see who's coming and going to his office, Because we had some friends in the police department, so if we took down license, we know who's visiting him, then we know who for calls. So we kind of fought one guerrilla war, yeah, with the guys, But you have to do all those kind of things, And so then they kind of take you seriously.
Stories like that really drew me to ethnic studies, and the challenging of the dominant narratives that are embedded within law that, as the Waiahole Waikane struggle challenged, that, they were fighting a struggle for eviction against eviction that included both Kuleana landowners, but also people who are in month-to-month leases. So the idea that they knew that they didn't have a legal standing necessarily to remain on the land, but like he said, we ain't moving, that we have certain kinds of connections to place that cannot be severed, and we're willing to fight for them. So those are really the kinds of things that really inspired me to come to ethnic studies and think about it from a scholarly perspective as well.
It's actually pretty funny how much all of our stories kind of weave in together and we follow the same passions. When I came to college a while back, I really had no idea what I wanted to do as a major. I took ICS, I took business, I ended up settling in hotel management because my family's all in hotel management. And I started working into hotels, and I ended up working in hotels for 5 years, and I realized, even going through the college, I realized that I was gonna dedicate my life to something 24/7, holidays, everything, that it needs to be something more meaningful, because like the grind of the hotels was pretty intense. I mean, it was interesting. There's so many there's so many other stories that we definitely can get into, but for me, I needed to find a new passion, so as I was still working in the hotels, I came back to school and I ended up taking ethnic studies courses. And obviously one of my main teachers and inspirations was Auntie Davies' class. We ended up watching documentaries. So for me, growing up, we've always watched films, and we're like, that's the first thing your parents do sometimes when they're busy doing something. They toss in a movie and you watch it. But in Auntie Davies' class, we watched Sand Island Story. We saw the documentaries from Ōpua and those films. It finally clicked in my brain that stories these documentaries became the medium for change. Specifically for me too, because then it's like my whole career from that point on was I wanted to be a storyteller. I wanted to be a filmmaker. I had no idea what it is to be a filmmaker. But I finally found my passion, and it's one of those things I don't know how to describe it. For the longest time, you're just kind of floating along, just trying to find where you belong, and then when it finally clicks, it's like the whole world is so clear now. And I ended up graduating out of ethnic studies. I quit. I was working in the hotels for a while. Went back to ethnic studies. Decided that'd be my major, and then I took Academy of Creative Media, which was starting up at the same time. And it was a nice balance for me, a compliment for me, because as their school was growing, I'm still trying to find out my voice as a Native Hawaiian storyteller, whatever, local filmmaker, whatever that may be. But it was the stories in ethnic studies. It was all my classes from all the different teachers that I had here that helped ground the types of narratives that I was going to tell in my movies. And it helped tremendously when I ended up going to grad school up at Chapman University in LA, in Orange County. And it's funny because everyone there, they've all wanted to be filmmakers ever since they were little kids. Their role models were Spielberg, George Lucas. They've had it in their minds that they're going to be these amazing Hollywood filmmakers. And for me, I just wanted to tell a Hawaii story. And it was interesting because seeing how that played out, and LA, it's very competitive too. They kind of, just because of how the system is created, you're competitive against one another, and you ended up, you challenge each other for resources. And thankfully, I feel like I always gotta call back to it. It's like my background in ethnic studies allowed the stories to be more real than their stories. Most of their stories are derivative of other films, of other narratives that they've seen through Hollywood. And then the stories that I tried to tell came from home, came from our aunts and uncles, and I got lucky, I think. I feel like, and yeah, I'm not too sure how I'm gonna end that. But then thankfully, for my thesis film, I did Stones, which is an adaptation of a legend from Uncle Buddy Wickman from Kauai. It's about the Mu. And that was for me, I wanted to tell that story as a Hawaiian filmmaker because it was all gonna be done in Hawaiian language, and it was all going to be done. It's a Hawaiian legend, and I'm trying to sell it off to, or have the kids. I was competing with other kids in LA, you know, so it's like everyone had like bank heists and all these crazy movies, and I had a simple story about these two people trying to get back to their family. And yeah, and then thankfully it got picked. Like I think out of all of our year, in our year, my film was the only one that got to screen at Sundance, which was pretty amazing to be able to. For me, it helped validate the fact that I was able to screen there, because like that audience there it's so wide, it's so unique, and they're always looking for unique stories, and it's always against the grain, you know, and to see. And to be able to have a Hawaiian language film be screened there and have people cry and get emotional in it, like, it just validated that our stories needed to be told. So, yeah.